things up for this conference. So I'm thankful to be able to be here at the University of Tennessee. This is my second year being here. So as I've thought about this conference, and the conference that I attend the most is the American Society of Criminology, and this is definitely not that conference. So that's been very impressive to see a space, and as I've talked with others too who've been here, what are these spaces, these universities, these settings around the country that exist, and the people that do the work that make us passionate. So starting off with the conference, I've been impressed with the key presenters. So Drs. Platt, Renzetti, Payne, Kilgore, Story, and Farrell. Taking something from what each of you have said, and also the panelists, the ones I've been able to attend. I wish I could have attended all of them. That definitely a positive impact. So as I think about thank yous, which I might take some of this from Michelle's final thing, but I was thinking first off, I'd like to thank John Scheffner, our department head, for the support to make this conference happen. So I think as I came here too, I left tenure track. I was a tenured associate professor, promoted and tenured at New Mexico State University, for which I left to come here at the University of Tennessee. The social justice theme that the Department of Sociology has is always been inspiring. The people that are here, definitely impressed by Salo for taking on the organizing and keeping us all on task. And there's not many people like Lo that can do that. Michelle and Juan, the other criminologists, so as our support to try and help make this conference happen. The graduate students who are behind the scenes working. And so everyone for taking time out of their busy schedules to come out to Knoxville, Tennessee. So a little bit of two final things I'll offer is a little bit about my own biography and work, and then that way and how it'll place my thoughts too on new directions in critical criminology. So as this conference, I could probably say something about American Holocaust or westward expansion and the U.S.-Mexican War and how it took over the Southwest. So I'm pretty much coming from that area of the country where my own family, coming and being based in generations of exclusion, that we're lucky to finish high school. You don't see too many of my family and background in the community where I'm from, even in college. So as a first-generation college student, I have closer association with people who have been and are in prison. But as my networks have changed over time, it's been good to be able to expand my context. So in the beginning, as I was thinking about my goal for academia, in 2006 where I was kind of at a place where I wanted to be somewhere that was more racially and ethnically diverse than the university where I received my PhD. And so I went down to New Mexico State University, which is a Hispanic minority serving institution. So my own family being from that region of the country of the Southwest, I thought it would be a place for revolution as we talk about these spaces that are kind of hybrid or not being really here or there. The border region has always been tied up with revolution and people back and forth. So I thought going from Denver, Colorado, that my activism and stuff would now transcend to a whole new level. But what I came to find out, and this is something that is in the institutions that we are, that academia, about how can you even make something like this happen? How can you put together a conference like this? So, my whole department, which was in criminal justice, was all social justice oriented and all doing great work. But to be able to nurture and foster and support the work that they're doing. And so I think some of these barriers that people face, as I was looking at, one of the panels I attended to on, scholarly activism and, it was the only one probably that I attended to that talked about, and Platt's too, on the first day, about promotion, tenure, and what it takes to be even at these institutions of higher education. So I think even for myself, I've worked very hard within ASC and published a book and got a second book coming out on the way. As I've looked at these war on gangs that has existed, so these groups historically, if we place them based in places marginalized, segregated, and people of black and brown communities organizing at a level of youth to do something about the conditions that they're in, and the groups themselves being in a place that you know, have been from the state some of the most opposed groups in our society, and some, you know, of the violence, rightfully so, but also some of this moving at levels that is, you know, targeted against at a level that, you know, some others are not. So as I look at this war on gangs, I come at it through a racial oppression kind of theoretical background and colonization and how it shapes where people are coming from. So with research and that background, and for this conference, I thought my own thoughts for new directions of where we can go is the very first and probably most essential important thing in my work and the work that I try and do from here on out is the incorporation of individuals of underrepresented backgrounds, particularly race and ethnicity, but also gender and class as lead researchers and collaborators in the production of knowledge. So this is something for which the Racial Democracy, Crime, and Justice Network, I think, has played a key role. And so other splinter groups such as Latino and Latino Criminologists and the Division of People of Color and Crime. And so I'm thankful for those of my friends and colleagues who've come out here. So Charlene Shiroti Durán, Yasser Payne, Anthony Peguero, Gail Isles, Shauna Gray, Jason Williams, Sean Wilson, newly met Robert Vargas. So that important piece of, that I think Yasser Payne was talking about, of participatory action research and what books and what things that we talk about as you know, critical criminology. So expanding it. The second one I would also like to add for increasing scholarly activism. So the public criminology and ways in which I think Audon Morris's book, and which Eric Wright's been doing too, about the scholar denied, for which Du Bois, W.E.B. Du Bois, and the work and how his stuff has often been forgotten over time. So you know, I think this would be the group, the people here, to capture some of the ideas and things that are being generated. And I think thirdly, this is the one that maybe is a little different for me because I am an ethnographer, I'm trained that way too. But as I've worked on things for activism and moving things differently, as I study another group of you know, death at the hands of law enforcement through officer-involved shootings, I pretty much started qualitatively, but then I've had to join forces with quantitative sociologists, so statisticians. So my argument's being seen as a way in which methodologically, you know, these journals and places can critique you that it's not scientific enough. So now you can have, you know, so that piece that I think as a discipline to make some of these voices being heard, I think methodologically merging qualitative and quantitative interdisciplinary work, ethnic studies, Chicano studies, Africana studies, social work, psychology. So I think to get at some of these root problems that we're experiencing in the community. And so with that, that's my little piece, and I'll hand it off to Dr. Brown.
One quick announcement for those of you who are interested in ride sharing this evening to the airport. Perhaps you could come up here afterward. I know a few folks are looking for that. Can you hear me? Is this on?
No.
Yeah. I have problems with voice carrying. Okay, so as Robert, as should be apparent with Robert's discussion and with all of us here who are identified within our program, it's still not on.
That's okay, we can hear you. We can hear
Okay.
you.
So, who are identified as criminologists. We're in a department that is keen on actually recognizing us as critical criminologists. So we have these constructs we work within. And so I think we've spent a lot of time not just organizing and planning, but really thinking and perhaps obsessing with the title of the conference. So we get new, we get directions in critical criminology. And so these are terms that are, for me, of course, inherently problematic on all kinds of levels. So there's new, and new is problematic. Why is it problematic? Well, Tony's already told us newness is tentative, it's zigzaggy, it's filled with distrust. I think it's fair to say by now, and I already had this written before but anyway, that it's haunted by our failures of the past. But I'm still interested in thinking about what happens if we truly commit ourselves to this newness, this idea of what the newness might be. And I think whatever that is, it carries key things with it. It's uncertain, it's unthinkable, it's unanticipated, and I have a bit more trust in those terms than I do in the actual new. It's also, I think, important that if we're going to be interested in that, we have to think about, going back to what Robert just said, what happens to all the disciplinary frameworks that we lay hold to, but particularly one that I think is unique in its collusion historically with the state. We bear that. That goes with us. And it's there even in its critical forms, because every step we take, every day, we risk reification, co-optation, confusion, and a very compromised pluralism. But I also agree with Tony that we take risks. We do some of that anyway, because we have some sort of faith in an unknown, an unanticipated unknown, an unthinkable unknown that might just be better. But I think we get caught up in that in a particular way. So in terms of the conference, I've been really intrigued with the fact that so many people introduce themselves by saying what they're not, or who they may be. But how we identify ourselves in all of this, I'm much less interested in. I think the ways we're qualifying ourselves in all of that, and the kinds of defensive posturing that can come with that, just distract us. They're distracting us from what we need to do, what the work is on the ground. So there's questions, though, about how we are to enter a space of what my colleague here has taught me a lot about Low-Pressor in terms of lesser harms. That we're not really interested in crime anymore either. We're interested in harm, and we're probably interested in something else beyond that as well, right? Of what it is to really think about, as Brett's film does so well, alternative forms of sociality, different ways in which we can think about socially just relations. And how do we do that if we're still laying claim to disciplinary kinds of frameworks? So are we capable of doing this kind of work, of finding a space of belonging for whatever the work is that we're doing, that I think we all are committed to? How do we do this? How are we capable of doing this within and without? Because I think we're going to be doing both. The institutional supports that now house us right here, that compromise us, and that always leave us cleaving for more. What does it mean to carve out not just a home, but a refuge for our work and our lives intellectually? And to do that even as we put our work on the line with those who've already always been there. So in thinking about that, in the state of Tennessee, we've had a long semester, we've had a long school year, and everybody's feeling morally compromised and a bit defeated in a lot of ways. In the state of Tennessee, in the past couple of months, the legislature has moved to defund the Office of Diversity and the resources for diversity initiatives here. We can't even get past the problem of the term diversity to get to the real needs of difference and survivability for our students, our staff and faculty, let alone the people that are directly impacted by all the things we've been talking about, right? So there's that. They passed a bill allowing mental health counselors to turn away LGBTQ patients on the basis of religious beliefs. They passed a bill allowing concealed weapons on campus. These are bills the faculty overwhelmingly opposed. And so they told the faculty, our state representative said, well, if we have a mass exodus of some of these liberals who responded to this, and we all signed our name, we're there, we're visible, maybe this will give UT a chance to hire some conservative teachers. And also, they should take their medication. The one thing they don't know about critical criminologists is we know how to medicate. In 2014, Tennessee became the first state to jail mothers whose babies were determined to have suffered quote, harm during pregnancy as a result of illegal drug use. It's a state trying to bring back the electric chair and set execution dates after a long history of actually being the one anomaly in the South of not pursuing executions. And of course, as much as that's a pathological precedent setter in all sorts of ways, it's really representative of too much of our contemporary moment all over. So part of what I would point to, one more text I would add to our reading list, is that the university is a space in a way like critical criminology. And this is complicated, but bear with me. I would really encourage you, if you have it, to take a look at Stefano Harney and Fred Moten's work on the undercommons. And part of what they say is it cannot be denied that the university is a place of refuge. And it cannot be accepted that the university is a place of enlightenment. In the face of these conditions, one can only sneak into the university and steal what one can. To abuse its hospitality, we're doing it. To spite its mission, to join its refugee colony, its gypsy encampment, to be in but not of. This is the path of the subversive intellectual in the modern university. C. Wright Mills says, orient your work to the central and continuing task of understanding the structure and the drift, the shaping and meanings of your own period, the terrible and magnificent world in which we live. Judith Butler says desubjugation only happens when a mode of existence is risked, which is unsupported by the regime of truth. What is criminology and what is critical criminology that's co-constituted within and against it, if not a regime of truth? So we know a lot about criminology. We've been going over that. Criminology tends to reproduce itself internally. It narrows itself. It devalues theoretical inquiry too often. It fetishizes method. It's an omission, a blatant omission of lived experience. It doesn't talk a lot about subjugated knowledges like critical race, queer, post-colonial, settler colonial, black feminist work. Its most useful work, as we've already discussed, occurs on the horizons or margins. And I think when the history of this present is written, the dismantling of whatever we hope to dismantle will have happened not because of us necessarily, because of all of those who live in the shadow of the project that we're complicit with, and the work that they're doing. So there may be some strategies, though, embedded in all of this. We recognize, we know the unacceptable contradictions that allow us to attract massive numbers of undergraduates, that allow us to accumulate massive dollars in grants, not particularly critical criminology necessarily, but in general. And all of that in a time of fiscal, budget, and university closures crisis, so all of that going on. We recognize that students are at our door daily asking to become police, profilers, probation officers, judges, for complex socioeconomic reasons that relate to a failure of the imagination in the context of where we are. We know they need a job. We know they want to put bread on the table. We know they come from generations of folks doing this. We also know they have this weird voyeurism with it all too, right? And that they're attracted to it. We work in an area, criminology, that's dictated by criminal justice and criminal law and its categories, its logics, its discourses. And if there's a place of possibility beyond that, it is going to be found in this messy project of whatever the world is that we call policymaking, reforms, non-reformist reforms, rights claims, efforts to co-opt. Rob and I were just at a conference where there was a lot of discussion about co-opting the actuarial, the biopolitical language of what works, of evidence-based research, in order not to continue reifying, as Gottschalk says, recidivism, reentry, reinvestment, but to display the brutality of policing, the numbers of people killed, the failures of the most well-funded agencies in the history of public institutions over education, over healthcare, over economy. But whatever criminology may be, what criminal justice is, I think, after years of working with it, is clear. It's overtly, unflinchingly synonymous, to continue a theme, with what Ruthie Gilmore states is the state-sanctioned or extralegal production and exploitation of group-differentiated vulnerability to premature death. Of course, she's defining racism. So it's not enough just to map the machinery of death and injustice, but we must give attention to conditions for its very possibility and conditions for the possibility of the otherwise. And in all of that, in doing that, we're going to have to disarticulate our most basic relationships, starting with the one thing that I think haunts us most thoroughly, crime and punishment. So, disconnecting, disarticulating common sense linkages that are empirically denied and defied, and to do so long enough to generate and develop robust alternatives. In all of that, we're going to have to reconceptualize everything. So, the strands are confusing, the legacies are fraught, the failures are catastrophic. So is there, as Jonathan Simon argues, a radical need for criminology, or is criminology in radical need of becoming something else? I think if we talk to the people that we often are talking with, right, whom we call the directly impacted, the folks in the room that we've learned so much from this weekend, the communities of color, the racialized subjects of the state, the women who seek safety and know not to go to the state to do it, the LGBTQ community, the disabled, who are most vulnerable at the hands of state violence. Honestly, in all those discussions, I have yet to hear them clamor for a criminology. What they do ask for is food, housing, jobs, education, health, safety, demilitarization, no more prisons, no more police, the capacity to live and exist, to pursue something that's livable, meaningful. And what do we know of those things? So what do we bring? I think that's the struggle. I think that's the struggle they're pointing to, right? So no more of the mythic frameworks of the liberal, where the struggle's about individual rights claims, or a single, atomized, acontextualized, ahistorical, I thought I could get more A's in there, identity at the foundations of the liberal state, but for hard-earned, necessary alliances that are collective. And that's going to mean a few more things. So I think that folks like me, and other folks as well, we're going to be accountable first and foremost for our privilege, for our whiteness, for our distance, for our abstractions. And we're going to have to theorize our own place in this process. Among the many, I think, beautiful gifts of Black Lives Matter is their direct insistence to white people figure it out. Figure out your own role, your own responsibility, and your own accountability. That's the work, as Tony has told us, of history, of comparison, it's of theory, it's of rigor, and it's hard work. I don't think we've done. This is where the imagination is particularly critical, because I think this is probably the only conference I've heard the imagination mentioned so much. It's incredibly devalued. Angela Davis, imagination is a political process. And if we're going to do the work where we are, we're going to have to imagine other kinds of spaces of refuge in which to do that, and why we're doing it. How is an informally organized study group formed out of a love for the hard work of transformation, premised on the material need of survivability that's visible to us, different from curriculum requirements, degrees as credentials, hyper-competitive one-upsmanship, loss of self, and what many confuse as intellectual work, methodological narrowness. The list goes on and on. Or just the general settings and borders and boundaries and constraints of the seminar, the conference, the textbook, the professional organization. So where is the unanticipated work, the action, the formations that come out of such a space? What will it take to engender such a space? How will our individual and collective works, our writings, our pedagogies, and our lives change in the process? So I think that someone has to stand on the line where the bodies always are, and be fairly uncompromising. So I'm not sure where Tony and I are on this, but I don't see abolition as a utopian scheme alone. I definitely see it as a space that transformed my vantage point. When I talked and learned from the targets of the carceral state, I saw it as lived epistemology. And I think of it more appropriately, I think, akin to something like the Jewish philosophy of Levinas, directing us in another route altogether. To be free is to build a world, he writes, in which one could be free. What do we offer in the way of freedom? Foucault says our liberty is at stake. Butler answers, liberty emerges at the limits of what one can know, at the very moment in which desubjugation of the subject within the politics of truth takes place, where the questioning practices begins, and the question takes the form of, what therefore am I? Where the field meets its breaking point, where the site fails to constitute the intelligibility for which it stands. So, some of where we are. For me, this is the history of the present for criminology, and as Jason reminded us, it's the moment of obsolescence. So I don't know what to make of that entirely, so let's keep going in terms of that. So in the spirit of conclusions, I invite you all to continue our collaboration. and let's stay. Let's not leave because they're asking us to go. Because they never made a space for many of us in the first place. Only the privileged can leave anyway. So let's plan, let's steal, let's study, let's intervene, let's transform. Let's sink the funding when we can. Let's hold workshops at Highlander Center. Let's hang out at your place too, where your true refuge is. I'm looking at you, Eastern Kentucky. Let's ask what Southern Appalachian work here in the region looks like for those of you that are local. Let's reconsider what it means to develop freedom schools and social justice schools and the schools that go beyond these walls. Let's ask what the life support of the undercommons can bring. Let's gather the intensities and use them intentionally, because we do enough non-intentional work in the labor of the university. So what forms might this take? One thing I would say is I just always leave, I'm someone who arrived at the moment of mass incarceration's appearance and tried to map it, and this is dismal work, and I'm incredibly optimistic. Because I do see a lot of things happening. I think we do have new spaces in practice. You don't get Brettsville without something happening. You don't get this demonstration that stories do organize us. And that if we listen to the people whose stories they do the work. They're already doing the work. They've been doing the work. It's not a problem of newness. It's a problem of recognizing what has already always been and what is there, what is present. I would again ask us to think about this in the context of fugitivity, the fugitive moments, of which we have long. We have an incredible archive in this country because we deal in exploitation and confinement and systems of slavery. What forms has it already taken? Where can it go? So let's propose knowing that we're going to fail, we're going to make mistakes, but we're there because there is a radical love that's strong enough not simply to disrupt the place of our origin, but to make the demands visible in a way that allows us for new forms of common sense that disrupt everything. A gathering without end. And I think in that moment, the work of criminology as a project will be something we've never seen before, and we won't need criminology anymore.